take away a man's right to speak his mind in a country founded on that very principle, you don't really have a country now, do you?
Mr. President, what about the new Pope? Any thoughts on the new Pope?
Are you staged by the new Pope?
Well, I made the announcement that we saw smoke, but I actually have not seen the official announcement of names, so we look forward to hearing about it. I'm sure it's going to be...
Someone said that.
What is the mark of the beast, the image of the beast, and the number of his name? In this study, we're going to look at current affairs and history to get a clearer understanding of this very controversial subject matter.
I am an American soldier.
I'm a warrior and a member of a team.
I serve the people of the United States and live the Army values.
I will always place mission first.
I will never accept defeat.
I will never accept defeat.
I will never quit.
I will never leave a fallen comrade.
I am disciplined.
I am disciplined. Physically and mentally tough.
Trained and proficient in my warrior tasks and drills.
I always maintain my arms, my equipment, and myself.
I am an expert and I am a professional.
I stand ready to deploy, engage, and destroy
The enemies of the United States of America in close combat.
I am a guardian of freedom and the American way of life.
It's an America driven by freedom, where free people pursuing happiness in their own unique ways create free enterprises that employ more and more Americans. I see an America with a growing middle class, with rising standards of living. I see children even more successful than their parents, and others congratulating them for their achievement, not attacking them for it.
Have you ever wondered why such a young nation as the United States is very patriotic, with an unquestionable loyalty to their nation state, where their advertisements, films, soaps, and all types of entertainment infuses a nationalism into the metaphysics and DNA of the culture, where both secular and religious figures pledge allegiance to the bars and stripes of the American flag with a very fervent zeal. In order to understand that question, you would need to take a trip to southwest England, to a city on the south coast of Devon called Plymouth. It was here in 1620, as the marker shows, that a company of religious Englishmen called the Pilgrim Fathers must have walked down these set of stairs and decided that they would leave their mother country and migrate, never to return, to go what was then known as the New World. And they left England and eventually arrived in an area that still bears the name of the Native American tribe, Massachusetts. And the region where they set up shop, they set a boundary stone there with the date of their landing. It is well known to American historians, for not everyone believes that they have reaped the benefits of the Puritan heritage, the American dream.
Our forefathers weren't the Pilgrims. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us.
It was on the ship the Mayflower that the inhabitants on board were to set up not the first, but the second English colony and settlement after the founding of Jamestown in Virginia in 1607. On that ship, the Mayflower, compact was signed on November 11, 1620 by 41 of the male passengers. That was a pledge to uphold solidarity that stressed the civic values of justice, equality, and responsibility, and was a precursor to the US Constitution. When the Puritan Commonwealth of New England was set up, it was designed to be a society that was not to be governed by tyranny and suppression. And every year, Americans celebrate Thanksgiving in memorial of the Puritans' first harvest in the New World in 1621, though the Native Americans don't think too highly of it. But the Puritans' strict ethical code of life was rooted very deeply in the Old Testament, and they viewed their migration from England to the New World as prophetic, seeing themselves as ancient Israel fleeing Egypt into the new land of Canaan. And from studying their brand of Christianity, we get a picture why North Americans are very patriotic. It can be traced back to the Puritans and their worldview. With American Puritans, indeed, we find for the first time the beginnings of a coherent American ideology. An ideology that is based on the premises of the ultimate separation of America, the New World, from the corruption and degeneration of the Old World. Seeing their migration as an apocalyptic revelatory event, American Puritans were the first to accord America a single, independent role as a sacred place in the history of salvation. Geosophy is to geography what historiography is to history. It deals with the nature and expression of geographical knowledge, both past and present, regarding men's sense of terrestrial space. Geosophy, therefore, deals with human desires, motives, and prejudices towards space in time. Geopiety to denote the special dimensions of man's religious, emotional attachment to his terrestrial space. Religiography is religion that has to do with geographic actualities or the role of terrestrial space within the confines of religious thought and experience. The term geotheology signifies the theological nature and meaning of space. Geoteleology deals with the destiny of the world within a theocratic universe, controlled and directed according to the divine scheme of God's providence. Geoeschatology and geoapocalypse, as branches of both geotheology and geoteleology, deal with men's attitudes towards space according to the eschatological and apocalyptic visions, or according to prophetic imaginations. So the Puritans were the first set of settlers to shape the geosophy mindset, and this is the primary reason why North Americans are so patriotic to their land. But as the Puritans still lived in the Old Covenant, especially on how their society and government was to be modelled, the Native Americans who the land technically belonged to were seen as Canaanites, to be removed of their own homeland by force. And many Christian historians who praise the Puritans for their strict Christian piety ignore the brutality and genocides that were committed by the Puritans. In a well-documented book titled The American Holocaust by an American historian, David Edward Stannard, the current professor of American Studies at the University of Hawaii, he records how the Puritan leaders continued the horrors of the Catholic conquistadors in South America that they execute on the natives, and he names them. William Bradford, who is depicted on the Mayflower, kneeling in green apparel, holding his hat, and in this picture in brown, holding his hat on the shores of Massachusetts, praised God when men, women, and children were cruelly murdered during the Pequot War. John Winthrop, a wealthy Puritan and one of the founders of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, who became its 2nd, 6th, 9th, and 12th governor, believed it was a right to take the natives' land from them by force, and the Puritan divine, the Reverend Cotton Mather, called the Native Americans barbarians, pernicious creatures, ravenous howling wolves that should be consumed as the dust before the wind from a world that was burdened with them. Just to note, this was not all the Puritans, but the mindset of some of their leaders. But it wasn't just Native Americans who felt the wrath of the Puritans. In England's capital, overlooking the Tower of London, is the oldest church in the City of London, which has the oldest surviving piece of architecture, All Hallows by the Tower. It has on its walls the name of two famous Americans, one who was married there, President John Quincy Adams, and another who was baptized there, William Penn, the famous Quaker who founded a province named after his family name, Pennsylvania. The Religious Society of Friends, better known as the Quakers, were beaten and whipped by the Puritan-controlled government in North America because their belief differed to theirs. But they took it even further when Mary Barrett Dyer, an English Puritan turned Quaker, was hanged in the Massachusetts Bay Colony for defying a Puritan law that banned Quakers from entering the Puritan colony. Whatever one's views of Quakerism, what right has one Christian having taken away another one's life because they differ doctrinally? William Penn, a Quaker, saw what was happening to his co-religionists and had to act. He went to King Charles II in England, who signed the charter that gave William Penn that separate piece of land now called Pennsylvania, where there was freedom of worship, trial by jury, and freedom of religion for everyone, where the Native Americans could also feel safe and treated like normal human beings. But the Quakers were not the only Christians to feel the wrath of the Puritans. One of the earliest advocates for religious liberty, the Baptists, were persecuted by the Puritans, whose brand of Christianity did not exercise and practice the grace, love, compassion, and mercy of Jesus Christ. Though the United States praises itself as a land of liberty and freedom, its cherished freedoms have always come with a fight by a tiny minority who have always had to campaign and struggle to maintain it from the dominant ruling majority. The first true pioneer of American liberty is one of its unsung heroes, the 17th century English theologian Roger Williams. Born in London, England, and educated in Pembroke College in Cambridge University, he left England in response to the persecution of Puritans and the intolerance of Archbishop William Laud, who brutalized people who came out of line with the established church. This Baptist, Puritan, separatist, minister, statesman, and liberal became the first proponent of religious liberty and the separation of church and state, who took with him to the shores of the then US colony the true principles of liberty that he got from the Bible that was reintroduced back into Europe via the Protestant Reformation. Unlike the zero tolerance of most of the Puritan leaders, he introduced true Christianity into the colony that included freedom of conscience, human rights, toleration of others, and respect for independent thought, which is why he was highly respected by the native indigenous tribes of North America, who helped him when he was persecuted by the authorities, where he learned their languages and customs. He also became the first abolitionist advocating for the prohibition of slavery in the 13 colonies. He wrote a book in 1644 titled The Bloody Tenets of Persecution, where he quoted from both the Old and New Testament in the Bible that there should be no government interference in any religious matters, and therefore opposing the traditional Puritan exegesis, which supported using state force as we have seen in some religious matters. This was written in response to the Puritan minister John Cotton, who supported state enforcement of religious uniformity in Massachusetts. He acquired a charter in 1663 from the King of England, Charles II, and he set up the Providence, Rhode Island, a colony that was a refuge to dissidents and outcasts, the first real display of American liberty. Very few are aware that it was Roger Williams who greatly influenced John Locke the 17th century English philosopher and physician, who is regarded as one of the most influential of Enlightenment thinkers and known as the father of classical liberalism, and Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers of the separated 13 colonies, who became the third president of the United States and quoted Roger Williams' The Wall of Separation phrase in a letter to the Danbury Baptist Association in 1802. He also influenced the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights, and it is by reading his writings that we get a knowledge of his championing of both religious and civil liberties. This is written in 17th century English. It shall not be lawful to or for the rest of the colonies to invade or molest the native Indians. No person within the said colony at any time hereafter shall be anywise molested, punished, disquieted, or called in question for any differences in opinion in matters of religion, and do not actually disturb the civil peace of said colony, but that all and every person and persons may, from time to time and at all times hereafter, freely and fully have and enjoy his and their own judgments and consciences in matters of religious concernments throughout the tract of land hereafter mentioned, they behaving themselves peaceable and quietly, and not using this liberty to licentiousness and profaneness, not to the civil injury or outward disturbance of others, any law, statute, or clause therein contained or to be contained, usage or custom of this realm, to the contrary hereof in any wise, notwithstanding. What most people are unaware of is that the first champion of human rights and civil and religious liberties was Jesus Christ. The Lord taught the separation of church and state. In the British Museum is a bust of Tiberius Caesar, who is mentioned in the book of Luke and prophesied in the book of Daniel. Like all kings, the coins in his empire had his face on it to show that he governed the Roman Empire. And Jesus used this coin to introduce the separation of church and state. Show me the tribute money. And they brought unto him a penny. And he saith unto them, Whose is this image and superscription? They say unto him, Caesar's. Then saith he unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Jesus clearly established a distinguishing mark between that which is Caesar's and that which is God's, between the civil and religious power, and what we owe to the civil power and what we owe to the religious power. Jesus taught that love should be the basis of all societies that would reduce conflicts. Master, which is the great commandment in the law? Jesus saith unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it, Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Leaders should never be a tyranny to their members, like secular and religious governments, but take great care in winning them over with love and service, as Jesus led by example. But Jesus called them unto him and said, Ye know that the princes of the Gentiles exercised dominion over them, and they that are great exercise authority upon them, but it shall not be so among you. But whosoever will be great among you, let him be your minister, and whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant, even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many. Isaac Backus is also one of America's unsung heroes. He was a Baptist preacher, a champion of religious liberty, and unlike the Rosicrucian Thomas Jefferson, he was a fierce opponent of the slavery of black Africans. It was Backus who greatly opposed religious tyranny and established church in the colonies, and it was him who had one of the greatest influences also on the Bill of Rights. He said, The plain truth is, by the Gospel Charter, all professed Christians are vested with precisely the same rights, nor has one denomination any more a right to the interposition of the civil magistrate in their favor than another. and whenever this difference takes place, it is beside the rule of Scripture, and I may say also, the genuine dictates of uncorrupted reason. James Madison Jr. was the 4th President of the United States and is credited as the father of the US Constitution and the author of the Bill of Rights that was rooted in the champions of the US liberties, the Baptists Roger Williams and Isaac Backus. He introduced a republican form of government in which the power rests with the people, where the whole machinery of government is wanted by representatives elected by them. In Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution of the United States, it reads, "The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government." But American liberties are rooted in the Bill of Rights, and this is the law that will be abolished in order to establish the mark of the beast, especially the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The first 10 amendments were ratified effective on December 15, 1791. But the liberties of the First Amendment can be traced not only to Roger Williams, but to John Milton in 1644, 147 years earlier, who was one of the champions of liberty in his famous tract titled Areopagitica, the first official document that advocated freedom of speech. This is true liberty, when free-born men, having to advise the public, may speak free, which he who can and will deserves high praise, who neither can nor will may hold his peace. What can be juster in a state than this? But since post 9/11, we are seeing American liberties slowly and stealthily being eroded away, and the rights of the citizens are being infringed that gives the government more power. And the very men who have introduced these draconian laws are being praised by Christian evangelists. That's crazy.
A man of integrity, a man of great judgment, and a man who knows the law. That's how President George Bush described John Ashcroft, a man he nominated to serve as U.S. Attorney General. He's also called the architect of the Patriot Act. And it's a pleasure to welcome back to the 700 Club a dear friend of many years, former Attorney General John Ashcroft. John, good to have you with us today. Thank you.
Pat, it's always great to be with you, and I thank you for your ministry and what you mean to America. Keep telling the truth and keep calling it like it is.
Attorney General John Ashcroft, the top official in charge of enforcing the laws of the United States, as the nation's top law enforcement officer, heads the Department of Justice and all of its divisions, including the FBI, the INS, the Bureau of Prisons, and the U.S. Attorneys. In the Senate, the vote in favor of the USA Patriot Act was 98-1. In the House, the vote was 356-66. On October 26, 2001, it was signed into law by a triumphant President George W. Bush. Section 802 of the Act creates a federal crime of domestic terrorism that broadly extends to acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws if they appear to be intended to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, and if they occur primarily within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. Environmental activists, anti-globalization activists, and anti-abortion activists who use direct action to further their political agendas are particularly vulnerable to prosecution as domestic terrorists. Senator John McCain, who ran for president in 2008, is one of the U.S. statesmen that is trying to repeal the freedoms of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. He not only supported anti-Gaddafi Al-Qaeda affiliated rebels in Libya, but he also poses with and supports Al-Qaeda in Syria, as this article in London's Daily Telegraph confirms. This man loves war, and he was the mastermind of Senate 3081, known as the Enemy, Belligerent, Interrogation, Detention and Prosecution Act of 2010, which has his name on it, that, like the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act signed by President Obama, introduces the Inquisition and ignores the habeas corpus of the Magna Carta that introduces trial by jury, that was introduced into the United States by English Protestants and is a part of the Fifth Amendment of the Bill of Rights. It reads, "No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury." But as shown in previous studies on the two kingdoms, Hollywood prepares you and forewarns you that the Fifth Amendment, trial by jury, and the First Amendment, freedom of speech and dissent and a right to demonstrate, will be removed.
We're going to neutralize a lot of threats before they even happen.
Thought the punishment usually came after the crime.
SHIELD takes the world as it is, not as we'd like it to be.
This isn't freedom. This is fear.
100 years ago, after the war, our founders created a system they believed would create lasting peace. They divided society into 5 factions.
The only way you can survive is for each of you to claim your rightful place.
Everyone is tested to determine who we are and where we belong.
Initiates, we will be watching to see who you really are.
You are different. If you don't fit into a category, they can't control you. They call it divergent. You can't let them find out about you.
And what if they already know?
Then you're already dead.
The system removes the threat of anyone exercising their independent will.
Divergents threaten the system. It won't be safe until they're removed.
But these US statesmen are following the cue of one of the least known figures. The late John Courtney Murray was an American Jesuit priest who was influential in the United States when he was alive, who got on the front cover on Time magazine. He published a book in 1960 titled We Hold These Truths, which is the first very subtle attack on American liberties contained in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. He says, "The epistemology of the American proposition was, I think, made clear by the Declaration of Independence in the famous phrase, 'We hold these truths to be self-evident.' Today, when the serene and often naive certainties of the 18th century have crumbled, the self-evidence of the truths may legitimately be questioned. So rapidly have the generations slipped beneath our feet that the prophets of modernity and its freedoms, the Miltons and the Madisons and the Jeffersons, have already begun to seem slightly Neolithic figures to our backward glance. Certain of their insights retain validity, but the adequacy of their systems can no longer be upheld."
What's your name, little lady?
Hannah. Can I help you?
We're with the National Guard Regional Support Group. We're here to gather information on who's in the area, see what resources are needed.
They're just trying to help.
They need information to allocate resources.
Right, that's why they need my social security number. I'm with Benji.
And what are you guys gonna do?
Hi.
They have guns. They're supposed to have guns, Lily. They're soldiers. I don't know, man. They really creep me out.
We have a gun. Jesus Christ.
Why do you have that? Lev.
I found it.
It's loaded.
I can't believe you brought a loaded gun into my house. I'm sorry.
Look, I don't think we have any other choice but to cooperate with these guys.
This is my home, not a military base.
They need a place to stay, James.
It's not gonna happen.
Well, I think we should put it to a vote.
Well, it's not up for debate.
All in favor, raise your hand. Becky?
They can't force us to let them stay here.
Unless Congress has declared war and passed a resolution requiring quartering, which is unlikely given how quickly everything has happened.
Third Amendment.
The Constitution is the bedrock of our freedoms. You really should be more familiar with it.
This Roman Catholic Jesuit priest gently attacks the fabric of the United States Constitution, declaring that these systems should no longer be upheld. But while many may find his quotes shocking, the free Western press that is built upon the very foundations of James Madison and John Milton is now following the direction of this Jesuit. Since the opening of the 21st century, the men who have taken the office of the Commander-in-Chief of the United States, whether they have a thorough knowledge of their own history or not, are executing the ideas of this Jesuit, and other statesmen in these governments are laying the groundwork for North America to repudiate its government and model itself on the bureaucratic government of the papacy, leading men down the path to making an image to the beast, and democracy will forever be mocked.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I'm about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God. One heartbeat away from the presidency, not a single vote cast in my name. Democracy is so overrated.
Let us carefully analyze how the United States will first subject its own citizens by force, then the entire world. Digital Globe is a US company that dominates the geospatial information industry that provides high-resolution satellite images, aerial photos, and geospatial content for the US government and oil, gas, and insurance companies.
Our constellation of satellites, QuickBird, WorldView 1, and WorldView 2, orbit the Earth in a sun-synchronous orbit. This orbit allows us to image the surface of the Earth pole to pole every 90 minutes. The selection of image targets is an extremely sophisticated process. Having collected massive amounts of imagery and data, our satellites contact one of our many remote ground stations, allowing the onboard data to be offloaded while simultaneously transmitting the next collection plan. Offloaded data is instantly relayed to our processing and analysis experts.
With America having satellites that can map out the entire planet, they will be able to see every corner of the Earth. And who is one of the leading corporations that obtains imagery from this company? Google Earth gets its images from Colorado-based Digital Globe. Google openly tells us that once we log on, everything we surf is on a database.
If you have something that you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place.
Hi, my name is Miley Oye. I'm a senior support engineer at Google. Have you ever wondered how websites remember your username and password every time you visit? Or how online stores know which items you've added to your shopping cart? What makes these and other customized online experiences possible are cookies. So what is a cookie? It's a small file that websites place on visitors' browsers. The information in the cookie file travels back and forth between the browser it's stored on, say Firefox or Internet Explorer, and the websites the browser visits. Let's say I'm visiting google.com for the first time. Google places a cookie on my browser. The next time I visit Google, whether it's seconds, days, or weeks later, my browser automatically sends Google that same cookie with a cookie ID number that allows Google to recognize my computer.
With more and more of the Earth's population flooding into the city to look for work, leaving behind an agricultural lifestyle to an industrial lifestyle, this means that governments can have a better monitoring system over entire populations. In a book already quoted titled Cities Under Siege by an English professor, Stephen Graham, he recalls the demographics of city dwelling in over a century that will eventually lead to a system of control. At the dawn of the 20th century, 1 in 10 of the Earth's 1.8 billion people lived in cities, an unprecedented proportion even though humankind remained overwhelmingly rural and agricultural. Between 1957 and 2007, the world's urban population quadrupled. By 2007, half the world's 6.7 billion people could be classed as city dwellers. Given the density of cities, more than half of humanity is currently squeezed onto just 2.8% of our planet's land surface, and the squeeze is tightening day by day. By 2050, fully 75% of the world's estimated 9.2 billion people will most likely be living in cities. As Keith Dixon, a US military theorist of urban warfare, puts it, the increasing perception within Western militaries is that for Western military forces, asymmetric warfare in urban areas will be the greatest challenge of this century. The city will be the strategic high ground. Whoever controls it will dictate the course of future events in the world. With more and more people flooding into cities, the United States is going to use two very powerful methods of coercing the entire planet into a kind of enforced global worship. The first will be some kind of mesmerizing supernatural power that will be so strong that in order to resist it, you will literally have to be completely dependent upon God and deny your very senses, for it is going to capture the entire earth, and the Holy Scriptures forewarns of this deception. And he, talking about the United States, doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had a wound by a sword and did live. The only way of deceiving people through the supernatural is by slowly educating them into it, and the groundwork is being laid by introducing the entire world into something God says to keep totally away from, and we will see what that is. When thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, thou shalt not learn to do after the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that useth divination, witchcraft, or an observer of times, someone who practices magic, or an enchanter, someone who uses magic spells, or a witch, or a charmer, also someone who uses spells, or a consulter with familiar spirits, someone who summons up demons, or a wizard, or a necromancer, one who communicates with the dead. Let us analyze necromancy carefully. To lose a loved one is devastating, and it is hard for anyone to deal with, where you just yearn to see that person again. But what actually happens at death according to the Holy Scriptures? Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God, who gave it. That same book, Ecclesiastes, is unequivocally clear that when someone is dead, they are dead. For the living know that they shall die, but the dead know not anything, neither have they any more a reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Also their love and their hatred and their envy is now perished, and neither do they have any more a portion forever in anything that is done under the sun. This is seconded by the patriarch Job, where God is consistent. As the cloud is consumed and vanisheth away, so he that goeth down to the grave shall come up no more. He shall return no more to his house, neither shall his place know him no more. So if you've just buried a loved one, and then you see something that looks, sounds, and smells like them, beware, for it's not them. For if the spirit has returned to God, then what are you communicating with? Edutainment is opening a door into that curiosity. In 1990, a film came out called Ghost. It starred Demi Moore, who lost her husband, the late Patrick Swayze, to murder, and she was contacted by a clairvoyant starring Whoopi Goldberg to contact the dead. Necromancy was an occult practice that was relegated to pagan cultures, but this film was the opening door to the hereafter and research has shown that more and more people are seeing clairvoyance. The 21st century has seen a string of films promoting this belief in contacting the dead, and the more famous a celebrity, the more acceptable it becomes. In the film Hereafter about a clairvoyant who contacts the dead, it not only stars Matt Damon, but its executive producer was Steven Spielberg, and it was produced and directed by Clint Eastwood. Big names promoting necromancy. In the dark horror Gothica that starred Halle Berry, Robert Downey Jr. and Penelope Cruz, the teaching of necromancy is cleverly introduced by teaching that dead people can contact us to help us to combat crime. This is the same storyline in the film The Sixth Sense that also endorses necromancy, where a young boy is in contact with a dead girl who reveals to him a murder to help him resolve a crime. But the main star is Bruce Willis, and what may be quite freaky is that art started to imitate life when Bruce Willis was interviewed in 2002. Sixth Sense star Bruce Willis claims to have spoken to his dead brother from beyond the grave. The Hollywood star was with brother Robert when he died in hospital of pancreatic cancer, but he was so upset that he agreed to a suggestion from ex-wife Demi Moore to see a clairvoyant. Willis is said to have been convinced his brother was in the room because the clairvoyant was speaking exactly like him. He said, "Now I know there is life after death. I do not know how it works, but I believe it."
What you are about to hear is real. It has not been edited or enhanced.
I will see your word.
It is the voice of Ruth Baxter.
I will see your word.
This voice was recorded in August 2003. Ruth Baxter died in 1987. Electronic voice phenomenon, EVP, is the process by which the dead, through sound and image, communicate with the living through the static and white noise of modern electronic devices.
The 2005 film White Noise is another promotion of necromancy, and it also teaches how to do it via EVP, electronic voice phenomena. But what connection has this with the Vatican, the headquarters of the Catholic Church? Prophetically, she is described as making the entire earth drunk with her false teachings, as recorded in Revelation chapter 14 and verse 8, and Revelation chapter 17 and verse 2. And if the Vatican endorses communicating with the dead, which it does in her catechism, then the world will feel comfortable when the papacy teaches an occult practice that is totally opposed in the Holy Scriptures. The film White Noise, starring Michael Keaton, tells the story of a successful architect who is contacted from beyond the grave by his murdered wife and the shocking events that unfold. Electronic voice phenomena were first detected shortly after the invention of radio. Early radio engineers would often hear ghostly voices sweeping in and out of tune on their newly built receivers and recording equipment. Strange as it may seem, the Vatican employs a large number of scientists to ensure that the church is up to date with technological developments. They are often highly gifted and dedicated researchers who bring to science a refreshingly different perspective. In 1952, two of these researchers stumbled across ghostly messages while recording some Gregorian chanting. As they played back the recording, Fathers Gemelli and Ernetti noticed a whispering voice in the background, one that was definitely not there in the original performance. After a while, Gemelli realized that it was his own father's voice.
It is one thing to contact the dead. It is another thing to meddle, and you are meddling.
While many may think this is scientific discovery or supernatural phenomena, it is fallen angels who are cleverly impersonating the dead, and the priests of the Vatican and Bruce Willis have been deceived like King Saul, who, as the Holy Scripture says, perceived that he saw the prophet Samuel. Witches were once rather ugly in entertainment, but now they are presented as looking a bit more sophisticated and more attractive, though they still look quite dark. The very charmers that the scriptures forewarns us has also been reintroduced, and these witches look certainly sensual. At the start of the 21st century, the US media recorded people's fascination in the occult as a result of this occult phenomena that took shape that was an escapism from the post-9/11 paranoia and wars, and Time magazine asks the question, are we running away from reality when we indulge in fantasy? The Harry Potter series was a powerful tool that indoctrinated children from very early into necromancy, an observer of times, wizardry, witchcraft and casting spells, a charmer. And when the series was over, they put it into video game format where children can now cast their own spells. The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials series encourages children to have their own personal demons in the form of animals, or the language of the scriptures, familiar spirits. The fascination with vampires was once isolated to the goth culture, but the Mormon adult fiction writer Stephanie Meyer popularized the obsession with vampires through her Twilight series that was a mixture of romance and action. And the video game Castlevania Lord of Shadows 2, a very dark and gross looking game, is another promotion of a vampire, Dracula, to the gaming community. In 2014, there was a new wave of alien films with people's fascination or interest in, are there beings in other worlds? Hollywood is flooding the box office with a number of alien abduction films as well as installments for children. And though there has always been alien films, the 21st century has been just flooded with them. With the entertainment industry, particularly Hollywood, reintroducing every occult practice that the Bible warns us to keep away from, the more these images are bombarded in our face, it will not only desensitize us, but you will put your guard down with no resistance to the biggest supernatural deception that is to come upon this earth. There is nothing wrong with speculating into what the United States will try to do. The Korean technology giant Samsung did a marketing campaign ad in 2013 called Winners Takes Earth, a number of adverts that some believe was a marketing tool for the 2014 World Cup in Brazil. What was interesting was a strange occult image that appeared in London's Hackney Marshes in England, in Times Square in New York in the United States, and a holographic image on the mountains in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. At the 2012 annual Coachella Valley Music and Arts Festival in California, a holographic image of the late rapper Tupac Shakur was projected onto the stage. Its eerie appearance freaked out a lot of people, but the crowd went wild, for it not only resembled this hip-hop icon and sounded exactly like him, but the hits on YouTube were crazy. Does the United States intend to use holographic images on a global scale? The largest state in the United States is the oil and gas-rich Alaska. Like the highly restricted Area 51, it is the home of one of the most controversial top-secret projects undertaken by the US government. A research program that is jointly funded by the US Air Force, the US Navy, the University of Alaska, and the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, better known as DARPA. It is called HAARP, that stands for High Frequency Active Auroral, which is the Roman goddess of dawn, research project or program. Many people claim that it has been used for weather modification that causes earthquakes and tsunamis to disrupt global communication system. Whether true or not, what they do is top secret, and even at the doors has no official documents to verify these things. But HAARP does claim to be a scientific endeavor aimed at studying the properties and behaviors of the ionosphere. But in a well-researched book titled HAARP, The Ultimate Weapon of the Conspiracy by Jerry Smith, it records what the US government is capable of doing via its HAARP project. Could you control people if you could project holographic images into the sky, pictures of the gods they worship or of the demons they fear most. The Air Force thinks so as they are actively pursuing holographic projectors as a weapons system.
The dollar is the most remarkable achievement in the history of money. Think of it. This piece of paper of no intrinsic value, it cost nothing to produce, there's nothing behind it except the goodwill of Ben S. Bernanke. And let us not forget the US Congress. This piece of paper somehow still commands value and respect. How can the dollar be anything except the world's greatest monetary brand, the Coca-Cola of money? How can it be anything else but? Well,
one of a president's most important appointments is chairman of the Federal Reserve. The Fed is the symbol of the integrity of our financial system, and the decisions of the Fed affects the lives and livelihoods of all Americans.
The Fed is a sometimes very independent organization.
Didn't the Federal Reserve System fail?
I know my time has run out, but I really fundamentally disagree with your point of view.
The United States Federal Reserve System is the third central banking system in the United States history, whose signature or imprint are on US dollar bills. The best documented account of its founding is in a well-researched book titled The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin, that documents at the Jekyll Island estate, a private resort owned by J.P. Morgan on the Georgia coastline. Senator Aldrich, a leader of the Republican Party, and a number of financiers that included Henry Pomeroy Davison Sr., an American banker, Frank Arthur Vanderlip Sr., who was Assistant Secretary of the Treasury and President of the National City Bank, Abraham Pyatt Andrew Jr., Director of the United States Mint, the most famous of the bankers, the Jewish-born American banker Paul Warburg of the Warburg banking family, and the American banker Benjamin Strong Jr., who served as the first president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, where they introduced the Federal Reserve, a privately owned banking system. Congressman Louis T. McFadden was a Republican member of the U.S. House of Representatives, who was zealously opposed to the Federal Reserve Act that was signed not by lawmakers, but by bankers. Many believed he was poisoned into silence. Another book that documents its founding is The Secret of the Federal Reserve by the late Eustace Mullins, and its research is quite interesting. The First World War changed the status of the United States from that of a debtor nation to the position of the world's greatest creditor nation, a title formerly occupied by England. Since debt is money, according to the Governor Rena Eccles of the Federal Reserve Board, this also made us the richest nation of the world. The war also caused the removal of the headquarters of the World Acceptance Market from London to New York. Professor Gustav Cassel wrote in 1928, "The American dollar, not the gold standard, is the world's monetary standard. The American Federal Reserve Board has the power to determine the purchasing power of the dollar by making changes in the rate of discount and thus controls the monetary standard of the world." The United States has the world's largest single national economy with the most billionaires, 425. The second weapon in its arsenal it will use to subdue the world will be economics. And this is going to be a very serious test. "And he calleth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name." We will detail what these things are in the next study, The Mark of the Beast, Part 2. With world leaders praying for an economic miracle as a result of greedy and corporate financiers meddling with the world economy, and with half of the world's population living in poverty, where the gap between the rich and the poor is widening each day, it is not hard to see that it won't be that difficult to use the economic weapon as a tool for global control. As some recent studies have shown from ETH Zurich, a university in the city of Zurich in Switzerland in 2010 and 2011, they have shown that around 147 corporations control the majority of the world's wealth. The London School of Economics educated a unique scholar who was one of the few 20th century intellects who saw the power of corporate America over US politics. And Avram Manhattan was one of those rare minds who could look into world affairs a lot deeper than other scholars. And in his book titled The Dollar and the Vatican, a book once banned from Australia, he details his finds. Big business, the promoter of practically all subsequent North American aggressions, the most persistent destroyers of the civil liberties of the American masses. Towards the end of the last century, big business felt strong enough to buy no longer politicians or sets of politicians, but the presidency itself. Rockefeller and Carnegie practically took over great segments of the economic life of the United States. In North America, it was the Rockefellers and the Carnegies rather than the Presidents Grant or Hayes who in 1870 to 1880 ran the United States. President Ulysses S. Grant was the 18th President of the United States of America, and President Rutherford Birchard Hayes was the 19th President of the United States of America. But the men who really wielded the power in the US was the Scottish-born American industrialist Andrew Carnegie, who expanded the American steel industry, and the richest American who ever lived, John D. Rockefeller Sr., an American businessman magnate who founded the Standard Oil Company that is now called ExxonMobil in the US and Esso abroad. David Rockefeller Sr., the only surviving grandchild of John D. Rockefeller Sr., co-founder and regular member of the Bilderberg, as well as the former chairman and chief executive of Chase Manhattan Corporation, who is 1 year away from 100, continues the family legacy, and his son, David Rockefeller Jr., tells us how influential his family has and still is, which silences those who believe it's a conspiracy theory.
My family has been a global family for a century. They've thought globally, and they live in a very global city, New York City.
Whether you love or hate President Obama, since the death of President Abraham Lincoln, every president is bought and is a tool of the military-industrial complex, the rich or Wall Street. For it was the billionaires Eric Schmidt, executive chairman of Google, the Hungarian-born American business magnate George Soros, and Obama's distant cousin on his mother's side, Warren Buffett, the fourth richest man on the planet, that bankrolled Obama into office. With the rich wielding an immense influence over American life, let us look at a couple of examples of how the US can use its economic leverage to put nations into subjection. In a secluded area in the Mount Washington Hotel in New Hampshire in the United States, a meeting in 1944 known as the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference, also known as the Bretton Woods Conference, gave America the power to put nations in line if they didn't come in line with their monetary program, when they set up, as the sign reads, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank.
At the World Bank, we tell stories about adversity, courage, ingenuity, hope.
All of the US presidents of the World Bank have been US citizens, including its current president, Jim Yong Kim. But that advert wasn't telling the truth. These articles from the British press show that the World Bank keeps poor nations in permanent economic bondage and debt. And its sister company, the IMF, is no different. Though its presidents have never been Americans but Europeans, they still dance to the tune of US foreign policy, manipulating nation states into economic submission. The late Christopher Hitchens wrote a book that chronicled the bloodbaths of Henry Kissinger's meddling in countries all over the world. But an earlier book titled Dope Inc., the book that drove Henry Kissinger crazy, about the international drug trade, there is a chapter titled Jamaica. The IMF creates the perfect free enterprise economy. Henry Kissinger, a Rockefeller protege, said to Michael Manley, "I can give you my personal word," said Kissinger to Jamaican Prime Minister, "that there is no attempt now underway involving covert action against the Jamaican government."
The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, is urging Jamaica to reverse the declining fiscal deficit as a catalyst for economic growth.
To understand the International Monetary Fund, it is best to go back to history.
The London School of Economics educated one of Jamaica's prime ministers, Michael Manley. While in office, he was threatened by the US ambassador to Jamaica and Henry Kissinger that if he dared to nationalize the foreign-owned bauxite industry, the raw material aluminium, the United States was going to use her economic weapon, the IMF, to come down upon him. But he wasn't the only Caribbean leader the IMF threatened. This photo shows another reason why the United States was extremely vexed with Michael Manley on the left, and the man standing next to him, Morris Bishop. They were both allies of Fidel Castro of Communist Cuba, standing with his hat and army regalia on the far right. The London School of Economics, the education centre to many of the world's brilliant minds, is also where Morris Bishop, Grenada's Prime Minister, was educated.
My government has consistently sought to establish and to maintain normal and mutually respectful relations with our powerful northern neighbor. It is an unfortunate historical fact that every effort on our part to achieve this has been ignored or rebuffed.
After seizing power in a bloodless coup in 1979 from Eric Matthew Geary, who had dominated the political scene in Grenada for 29 years, Bishop ruled Grenada from 1979 to 1983. Despite his faults and lack of democratic elections, he was generally loved by the majority of the nation with a mass support, and unlike other black leaders who are bought by Western capital, he had the people's interests at heart, and the narrator was fortunate to see him in his car when he was 7 years old, just before he was killed. In Bishop's own words, he observed that the United States uses economic might and propaganda via the US media, other colonial-minded Caribbean leaders, Catholic priests, the CIA, the World Bank, and the IMF tried to economically cripple Grenada for achieving any success outside of US control. He said, "We discovered that the CIA had drawn up a three-pronged pyramid plan made up of propaganda, destabilization, economic sabotage and destabilization, and terrorist, counter-revolutionary, and assassination activities to roll back the revolution. And this discovery came after Newsweek magazine had informed the world that the National Security Council had considered blockading our country. Today, the counter-revolutionaries, a tiny minority of foreign priests, have laid careful plans to sabotage the revolution. Rome meddles in everything. Our capital program has also been the target of economic aggression. Just for this year alone, which was 1981, 1/3 of our capital program was in danger of being sabotaged as a result of last-minute moves by the US representative on the IMF board of directors to block a major loan from that institution to our country. And, of course, the World Bank has been busy trying to sabotage our efforts to attain financing from the European countries in the April co-financing conference in Brussels. The World Bank also tried to throw its economic weight in Bolivia when in 1999, following years of direct pressure from the World Bank, Bolivia's government agreed to privatize the public water system of its third largest city, Cochabamba, where the California-based Bechtel Corp doubled and tripled local water rates that led to the Cochabamba protests of 2000 that led to heavy demonstrations by farmers and street vendors. As shown in the last study on the two kingdoms on the Ukraine, the United States can use its economic weight to cripple individuals and even nation states who come out of line with the US global agenda. And this will be its weapon where no man can't buy or sell. And though she produces only 10% of the world's wheat, the United States is the world's biggest wheat exporter. And if you can control the very basis of human survival, our daily provision of food, as Henry Kissinger is on record saying in the mid-1970s, control the oil and you control nations. Control the food and you control people. In a magazine titled The Middle East in its June 2011 edition, it shows that the Islamic world cannot be a threat. Why? For it depends upon imported food. The Arab world's dependence on imported food is unlikely to change anytime soon. In recent months, the global shortage of wheat, one of the world's most vital foodstuffs, and grain, has resulted in price rises of up to 75%. Prices have also soared for rice and barley. The Gulf states, which spend more than $20 billion a year on imports, as well as the more populous countries, have been severely affected.
And we're just in the middle of shooting. We wanted to take a time out. Everybody's aware of how catastrophic the events were in the Philippines. We're happy to be making another Fast and the Furious, but there are times where, you got to check yourself. I mean, what's going on out there? People are without homes, people are without food, people are out of water. It's a heavy, heavy time. So right now for us, it really is, it's a race for relief. We got a team from Reach Out Worldwide is present, and it's always be on the ready, because the needs are going to be extensive for a long period of time. So basically we're reaching out to the fans. We love Manila. We were there last year. They received us with open arms. We love the Philippines. Fans, we want to rally you up. It's better to be armed and ready, and let's start sending in some aid. Appreciate it.
That was the late Paul Walker, who was part of the Philippine relief effort, who some people believed was murdered to prevent him from investigating and exposing a conspiracy to supply victims of Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines with a prototype permanent birth control drug hidden in medicinal supplies and food aid. Whether he was killed or not, we will find out in the day of judgment. But with the US aid being distributed to nations all over the world after a disaster or to refugees during a war, we can see how the United States can use food as a global weapon of control. And unbeknownst to most people, she is taking it to a whole new level with something called agribusiness. In a well-researched and powerful book titled Seeds of Destruction by F. William Engdahl, it records how by the 1970s, the food supply was controlled by a tiny monopoly of agribusiness producers, where hundreds of thousands of independent family farmers in the United States were driven out of business. The number of US farmers dropped by 300,000 between 1979 and 1998, and by 2004, 4 companies controlled 89% of the breakfast cereal market. The most famous of these is Monsanto, who have contacts in the US government. Its current head is a Scotsman, and their controversial policies is rejected by the EU, where Monsanto want to control the entire world's seed supply, where they want all farmers worldwide to use her GMOs, genetically modified organisms, that has been proven by studies to increase cancers and have deformed many different animals, as tests have shown. This is the corporate takeover of the United States industry, and it is important to observe these things so we can see the build-up to the closing events of prophetic history. As this study comes to a close, it is imperative to look at some examples on how the United States government can target a group who she sees as a threat, so we can see how she'll operate in the end times. Let us carefully observe targeted groups. They are Japanese Americans, communists, Muslims, and patriots, 4 selected groups that have been targeted by the US government. The first group are the Japanese Americans, and the following is one of the best kept secrets of the US history.
If you want to save the Emperor, I need proof. Did the Emperor order the attack on Pearl Harbor?
During the famous Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and the kamikaze, which were Japanese suicide bombers on US warships, during the war, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, which mandated the evacuation, relocation, and internment of the 110,000 men, women, and children of Japanese ancestry in the United States. US photographer Dorothy Lange took the pictures of these Japanese Americans who had all been rounded up and taken to concentration camps throughout the United States, suspected of being Japanese allies. There were no trials, no hearings, just evacuees taken to internment camps with barbed wire during the duration of the war from May 1942 to May 1946. No one was accused of espionage, and President Ronald Reagan made an official apology to the Japanese American community for what they went through. The next group are the communists, who were seen as the ungodly atheistic Red Menace. It was vociferously opposed by the ultra-conservative religious right, the so-called Bible Belt, who viewed race mixing as communism. They obviously hadn't read their Bibles in the book of Acts chapter 2. The 2 most prominent communist witch hunters were Senator Joseph McCarthy, a Republican senator whose witch hunting era has been named after him, McCarthyism, and a man who targeted anything that was un-American that he couldn't control.
When morals decline and good men do nothing, evil flourishes. A society unwilling to learn from the past is doomed. We must never forget our history. We must never lower our guard.
John Edgar Hoover had a very deep hatred for communism and was determined to crush it at all costs. He worked with Cardinal Francis Joseph Spellman, who, like Hoover, was a homosexual, who rallied the forces of the Catholic Church to help defeat communism, and a man who was appointed as Hoover's chief spy in Hollywood, Walt Disney. These declassified memos from 1954 show that Walt Disney was a special agent for J. Edgar Hoover's FBI. Hoover also had a very deep hatred for blacks, and any black radical group or movements were labeled as communism, as can be seen by this billboard with a photo of Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr. at an alleged communist training program. The Black Panther Party were very influenced by communism, and J. Edgar Hoover said that they were the greatest threat to the internal security of the country. They greeted each other with the clenched fist and saluted each other with black power or power to the people. But the clenched fist, though used as a symbol for black struggle, was really a symbol of communism. For wherever communism spread all across the world, its devotees used the clenched fist as a symbol of this global radical ideology. J. Edgar Hoover set up a plan to destabilize the whole movement and to turn blacks against each other. It was called the Counterintelligence Program, or better known as COINTELPRO. And as recorded in a well-researched book titled Agents of Repression that details COINTELPRO, it documents how William O'Neill was a double agent in the Black Panther Party, who gave the plans and layout of the house of one of the most influential Black Panthers, Fred Hampton, to the Chicago police and the FBI, where they murdered him in cold blood on December 4th, 1969. And after a number of years, the movement was exhausted from constant sabotage by the FBI. The next group are the Muslims, who were at the forefront of attacks in post 9/11. Hollywood built up the world very gently with a string of anti-Muslim films like True Lies in 1994. But in 1998, a film came out called The Siege, which many film critics have called prophetic.
We're not the first city to have to deal with terrorism. This is New York City. We can take it.
Why would Hollywood do a film that shows New York City being attacked by Muslims, America declaring martial law, and Muslims being tortured and rounded up into concentration camps or imprisoned indefinitely? Very interesting. Muslim leaders like Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, who was murdered by a NATO Al-Qaeda alliance, and President Assad of Syria, both men who helped the United States with the rendition program, were turned upon, then demonized. The Hollywood propaganda machine was churning out stacks of anti-Muslim paranoia movies that cleverly brainwashed the planet that Muslims were trying to take over the entire world. And when US soldiers are recruited in the army, their training consisted of targeting Muslims, where even US air bases designed training facilities which looked like neighborhoods in the Arab world. That was also the layout plan and design in video games like America's Army that propelled players into urban warfare and anti-Islamic hysteria. The next group are the Patriots, those who are loyal and faithful to the US Constitution and its liberties. In Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Patriots, US patriots are portrayed as domestic terrorists who plan to overthrow and replace the US government.
This is the day we've been waiting for. Years of training, years of sacrifice. This is for the jobs you streamlined, the debts you collected. This is for the homes you foreclosed on, the bailouts you took. We are the true patriots. It's time for a new balance of power.
The film White House Down also portrays a heavily armed group of homegrown mercenary paramilitary domestic terrorists. But where is all this going? And why is there an assault by the US government on its own citizens who possess guns? And why is the US cleverly putting out propaganda material to disarm the US population?
Columbine, Virginia Tech,
Tucson,
Aurora,
Fort Hood, Oak Creek, Newtown,
Newtown,
Newtown.
Newtown.
How many more?
How many more? How many more colleges?
How many more classrooms?
How many more movie theaters?
How many more houses of faith?
How many more shopping malls?
How many more street corners?
How many more?
How many more?
Enough.
Enough. Enough.
Enough.
Demand a plan.
Right now. As a mom.
As a dad. As a friend. As a husband.
As a wife.
As an American.
As an American.
As an American.
As a human being.
For the children of Sandy Hook.
Demand a plan. No more lists of names. It's not too soon.
It's too late.
Now is the time.
Before we all know someone who loved someone on that list.
No more lists.
No more.
Who they might have been. No more.
If we had just done something yesterday. It's time.
We can do better than this.
We can do better than this.
It's time.
It's time.
It's time for our leaders to act.
Demand a plan.
right now.
Anyone with any level of common sense knows that taking celebrities serious about ethical issues is a joke. Paul Walker was very serious about aid to the Philippines if you carefully studied his life. But other celebrities are a complete joke, just puppets for the US anti-gun disarmament propaganda machine. Many may ask, why are the United States patriots so obsessed with guns? You need to go to England to answer that question. Outside of London's National Portrait Gallery on the North Lawn is the Duke of York, who later became King James II. Crowned with imperial laurel, wearing the armor of Julius Caesar, just adorned in Caesarean drag. He was the last Roman Catholic monarch of England, and because of his fanaticism and his extreme measures, it is still against British law for a Roman Catholic to become a monarch of Great Britain. The Scottish historian J.A. Wiley tells us what extreme measures James II took in his well-researched book, The History of Protestantism. The Duke of York ascended the throne under the title of James II. With their papers on the throne, James was a tyrant. The Protestants were disarmed and left defenseless against the frequent outrages and robberies to which they were subjected. This was in the 1600s. The US citizens didn't want to make the same mistakes, allowing government tyranny to suppress their citizens, as Dave Areno, a member of the National Rifle Association and the Alaskan Machine Gun Association, tells us.
If you're not happy with the government and they're oppressing you, this gives you the ability to fight back. Much like we broke off from Great Britain in the 1770s, the first thing they did when they came over was they tried to confiscate weapons at Lexington, and that's what started the Revolutionary War.
So as a part of the Bill of Rights, the Second Amendment reads, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." When the narrator spoke to a lay preacher from the United States, he said once they do away with civil liberties, which is in the Second Amendment, then the government will be going after religious liberties. So who is next? Whenever people want to attack any group whose lifestyle doesn't fit too much in line with mainstream society, especially Bible-believing Christians, they always refer to Jim Jones. Jim Jones was a charismatic preacher whose members had so much confidence in him that he convinced them to relocate from the United States to Guyana and live in a free society where there will be no government suppression, economic bondage, and racism. This took place in the 1970s. They built the whole community from scratch, being so sure that they escaped the so-called corruption in the United States. But Jim Jones not only took all of their passports away from them so that no one could escape, there were also no Bibles. Just a community embodied in one man and his cult of personality, where his community was named after him, Jonestown. He eventually killed them all off in a mass suicide, giving them poison to drink that included himself. And groups that isolate themselves in remote areas, Western governments keep a vigilant eye on them. A 2014 film titled The Sacrament relives that Jim Jones story, where the producer, Ellie Roth, tells us that religions are all about brainwashing.
There's been a lot of great documentaries and things about Jonestown, and just recreate that period and do an authentic period piece, everybody knows how it's going to end. What's great about it is that it applies to David Koresh, to all kinds of brainwashing, to religion in general. There's so many different themes. It's such a complex work.
You guys ready? Watch it. We've been to some of the most chaotic, war-torn places in the world, but never for something as bizarre as this.
Here we are. Welcome to Eden Parish.
You guys built all this?
Father had a vision, and we built heaven here on earth.
Who is Father?
He's the guy that started all of this.
Can we speak with him at some point?
He agreed to sit for an interview tonight at the gathering.
It's been pretty amazing. Everyone we've talked to seems to feel that this is everything they ever wanted, and they all credit you for that.
Oh, I don't deserve the credit. You come down here and I'll give you a place to live. I'll give you a job. I'll give you a bed. These people are my family, my children. And when you write this up, just know that you're dealing with their lives.
Aren't those the guides? What are they doing with guns?
You don't know what's really going on here. This place is not what it seems.
Take it.
We have looked at the embryonic beginnings of US history and its modern day dismantling, and the examples of how groups can be targeted by the US government. Let us continue in this journey with Even at the Doors as we attempt to explain the mark, the image, and the number of the beast. As we go into the next study, we're going to look at the Bible and its clarification of what is the mark of the beast.